For those of us who've joined us in Napa before, you know the Beta SMB Institute Leaders Forum is special. It's a special location, a special venue, and best of all, special people. We pride ourselves on curating an A-list of attendees, the best and brightest leaders of our $500 billion plus business to small business marketplace. And every day we are adding speakers, workshops, and special events to this intimate forum, all of it highlighting the shared challenges and opportunities in a setting that drives casual and candid exchange. Join us at the 2022 Beta SMB Institute Leaders Forum, May 11th and 12th in Napa, California. Tickets are on sale now at betasmbi.com/leadersforum22. Hey, good day, everybody. Dave Walker here again from the Forward 22 event, and I'm really thrilled for this next guest because I certainly have been thinking a lot lately, as I'm sure many of you as well, about the real-world applications of virtual and the metaverse and these things that that we hear about that we may have a pretty firm grip on, or think we have a firm grip on, we don't really do. Or have no grip on at all, like me, and are really curious, more importantly, what the business applications of the metaverse and virtual experience really is going to be as we look forward. So I'm joined by Nikki. Pronounce your last name for me so that everybody gets it right.
Everyone gets it wrong. Mendonca. It's got
Mendonca.
a cedilla on the C. Yeah.
And it's a yes, that little, what do they call that?
Cedilla.
Cedilla. Thank you. The little cedilla on the C. Nikki Mendonca, who joins us from Accenture. Welcome, Nikki.
Welcome. Great to be here. Fantastic.
Great to have you here. Why don't you give us a quick background on yourself and what you do at Accenture?
Yeah, sure. So at Accenture, I run the software and platforms practice within Accenture Interactive. So that might sound very grandiose, but it's really to help all of our platform companies, large, medium, and small, with their marketing, sales, and service efforts to help sort of turbocharge their growth. And at the moment, what's particularly interesting is, part of that, I'm getting involved in virtual experiences, social commerce, gaming, metaverse, a whole myriad number of topics that really pertain to, developing next-gen techniques of growth for these platform companies. So it's a very exciting space to be in at Accenture.
Well, start us off by maybe a quick primer on all of those component parts and where exactly we are with particularly the business applications of all the things you just mentioned.
Yes, well, we set up a virtual experience practice last year. And what was very interesting is very quickly, the whole conversation of virtual experiences migrated to the metaverse very quickly. And you could see how obviously the likes of Microsoft, Meta, Apple, etc., stepped in, quite forcefully actually in the last 6 months. And that's because very quickly the client conversation moved from a pivot of physical events to virtual experiences straight into leapfrogging how one could almost get involved in the next generation of the internet and actually start to do much more immersive and create much more immersive experiences for a whole myriad number of stakeholders that companies serve. So really what was interesting is I think that the migration from a conversation sort of fixated on virtual experiences, which was a necessity to pivot from virtual events, obviously with the COVID crisis, just very quickly has migrated to how can we actually exploit the incoming metaverse.
Which is obviously kind of, that takes me by surprise that everyone is jumping so quickly into their understanding of the application of what really right now for many, I think is fairly abstract. There's not a lot to point to and say, yes, it looks like this, or company X does that. And so I think in your job, as you really start to evangelize, I guess, this whole notion of the use of the metaverse and virtual experience, have these conversations, how much education are you having to do? How much level setting are you have to do if this is actually what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, well, Dave, you've hit the nail on the head. It really is very much, we're in the stage of education, immersion, sort of testing, learning, iterating, optimizing, with a lot of our clients who are leaning in, particularly from the CPG vertical. We're actually holding very immersive workshops so that they can, obviously with the help of VR, technology and hardware, so that they can get immersed themselves, and really CEO plus their management team, sometimes driven by the CMO on the client side, really understanding the real world application of the metaverse situation and reality and art of the possible. And that's really where we are at the moment. We're really educating, we're immersing our clients, we're talking about a myriad number of use cases. So for example, even when we talk about virtual experiences before we talk about the metaverse, so you sort of see them in stages. With virtual experiences, we had to even educate clients as to how to use, enterprise clients and platforms and SMBs, how to really leverage the virtual experience world to turbocharge the demand generation, to actually create executive briefing centers that were more immersive, to actually do product and brand showcases, to maybe do more immersive investor relations meetings, because there's the opportunity there, especially with retail investing becoming so important. So we sort of did a myriad number of those immersion sessions, and through that, dependent on the different industries want to explore different use cases. So with CPG, it very much was a case of product showcases, brand showcases. We did some phenomenal work with Milan Fashion Week. A lot of CPG and luxury retail really grabbed on to virtual experiences as a much more immersive and lower cost to serve of launching certain products and sort of segueing into the live shopping phenomenon. And then for other industries like financial services and even public services, we sort of looked at different use cases. I mentioned investor relations, but particularly we've also looked at the power of simulation, because when it comes to public services, for example, and you look at companies like NVIDIA, you look at the power of simulation and what that can do to help some of these companies really get granular with some of their processes and really understand how they can use the power of simulation to actually transform a myriad number of things that they do across the enterprise. So I would say that depending on what industry we're talking to, the sort of spectrum of use cases for virtual experiences and then segueing into the metaverse really are now starting to differ and have different nuances.
So as you see some of these early use cases, and that was a great recap, by the way. There's obviously lots of places on the machine of virtual reality that you can grab hold of and actually do things with. But talk to us a little bit about, you mentioned lower cost of delivery. What are some of the other practical, tactical, valuable benefits that companies are seeing who are in these early adoption stages of virtual?
Yeah, great question. I think particularly, and we've done a lot of work with Microsoft actually on this, is to really look at the delta of performance and metrics you get across many things. So obviously, global scale is one. I think it caught everyone by surprise when we were doing the sort of rapid pivot at COVID, the fact that absolutely any content that you put on a virtual experience immediately has global access. And that's fantastic, because you immediately democratize all of your content and allow everyone, far and wide, especially on the African continent, access your content. And that is a sort of democratization of content. That global scale was even something that took Microsoft by surprise. And we do a lot of virtual experiences with them, including run the whole of Envision, which is a sort of VIP business decision maker series. And on the other side, we were also looking at the developments within enterprises and the absolute mandatory need to hit some important criteria, either on the ESG side and or the diversity, equity, and inclusion side. So on the environmental social governance side, there is no doubt that the pivot to virtual experiences really starts to make that pivot in your carbon footprint. And I think that, again, has taken a lot of enterprises by surprise, the fact that you can actually achieve your objectives, but at a reduced carbon footprint. You do not necessarily need to fly people around the world and obviously spend an exorbitant amount on accommodation. And that sort of, now that enterprises are having to report that ESG scorecard to the street, I think, being able to obviously hit the right metrics on that is incredibly important. And then, of course, with diversity, equity, and inclusion, another very important scorecard now within companies and them having to be very transparent with that scorecard, we're also seeing that because of the global nature and the sort of democratic nature of virtual experiences, you now can actually have very diverse panels. You can tick that right equality box and actually have a myriad number of voices partake and contribute to your events. And in terms of inclusion, we've also made sure that when we're putting on virtual experiences ourselves for our clients, we're making sure that we're being very conscious of accessibility and the fact that, yes, disability obviously is a thing, and I think it's 1 billion of our universe has some form of disability, and it's very important that we also make sure that the content is as accessible as possible. So I think that we've realized through COVID particularly that there are so many benefits to going virtual, and it's not too dramatic for me to say that with a number of our enterprise clients, when we're architecting their sort of annual program of communications, marketing and communications, sometimes we start with embedding the virtual experiences first, and then we layer on the physical on top of that in an annual calendar, especially now that we're being let out again. And that's a whole pivot in terms of a virtual first motion, which I think is very interesting, which is the first time I've seen it, in my corporate lifetime.
So, there's a whole ecosystem of providers, businesses that support delivery of web presence to e-commerce. Is there yet a real ecosystem of support for the delivery of meta and virtual experience for, let's start with large enterprises? I'm sure you have a practice that does this, but is there really are there really consistently now, are we seeing agencies whose sole focus is really to help large enterprises migrate into virtual experience, as a for instance? And then I want to go on to the middle tier of companies, and then I want to finish with, well, what's out there available to small businesses?
Yes, I mean, we are definitely seeing, even during COVID, we saw a plethora of companies launch really, very vibrant startups, and particularly, obviously, there's one in the UK called Hopin, but a myriad number of companies launch into the virtual experience space. And those same companies are also trying to sort of evolve their services into the metaverse. Obviously, with the metaverse, there's a spectrum of enabling technologies that make it difficult for everyone to compete, because the enabling technologies in the metaverse are everything from cloud, AI, edge, IoT, blockchain. The list goes on. And so it's not so easy for everyone to come to the party. So we think as we will develop more in the metaverse, we'll obviously see larger companies like the Accentures of this world, having the right tools, capabilities, toys in their toy box to be able to properly compete. So, but we're definitely seeing, a huge plethora of companies, and some stats have said that the virtual experience market will be 500 billion alone in a couple of years, which is just extraordinary. So definitely a plethora of companies. And then with regards to companies, boutique agencies, and even some of the big six, the WPPs, Omnicoms, etc., as well as some consultancies, we're definitely seeing a lot of investment now being poured into the metaverse. Yes, it's 10 years off, but in the next 10 years, even now, obviously, we can see everyone's getting their sort of investment plans and their ducks in a row, because there is a massive competition, not only for the hardware, like obviously VR, which is the gateway to the metaverse, but there's also an intense competition amongst big tech for who is going to actually own the operating system of the metaverse. So the war, if I can use that analogy, it has only just begun with regards to who is going to win in the metaverse.
And talk to us a little bit more about, I too struggle with the word war, but talk to us about the competition for the for being able to provide effectively the platform in which businesses bring to life their virtual experiences. Is it comparable to the browser war? Is that what we're talking about? We're talking about effectively a competition for where there are 2 to 3 winners, or is there a single winner? I'm just kind of fascinated by what you're teeing up here.
Yeah, no, great question. And gosh, if I really knew the answer,
I wouldn't be here.
I'd probably be doing something else. No, I think it's a fascinating landscape that is unfolding before our very eyes. I also think that potentially there isn't going to be one winner. The virtual worlds, I think there are a plethora of virtual worlds that will make themselves available, that will be created. In many respects, the metaverse is an incredible technological revolution that we haven't seen since the birth of the smartphone. And I was around then launching the iPhone in Europe, which was fascinating at the time. So it's really incredible, and in many respects, it's a developers, creators, engineers' paradise, because it's a completely new sandpit for them to play in. I do think that obviously big tech, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, Meta, etc., and obviously supported by a cohort of companies, Nvidia, Qualcomm, Roblox, etc., the list goes on. It'll be that sort of ecosystem of players that start to dominate the metaverse. There's no doubt about it. And to not put too fine a point on it, because the hardware is so critical, because it is your gateway to the metaverse, when Apple launch their VR hardware soon, built on the foundation of the competitive M1 chip, I really think that that's going to open the consumer's eyes to the metaverse as well as enterprise eyes. There are lots and lots of applications and use cases that are now becoming prevalent in the enterprise world. But I think the consumer world is still sort of catching up. Although I did see a stat, eMarketer said that they forecast for 2022 that 64 million people in the States will have at least tried VR once. And I think their stat is 101 million will have tried AR. So you're talking about numbers that are really beginning to scale here. So I think once you have the pull, particularly as well from some verticals like media and entertainment, it'll be very interesting, because even with Fortnite and Travis Scott, when he held his concert last year, he enjoyed 30 million viewers, which is quite astonishing for a 9-minute concert in Fortnite. And it's those sorts of stats which I think have shocked everyone, that actually there is quite a big consumer pull. If the reason to join is there, then the consumer pull is there. And particularly because we already have a foundation of gamers who are already very familiar with the technology, obviously NVIDIA, Unity, Epic, at the forefront of that. So, and Microsoft. So you can see how you already have a lot of foundational, not only technology, but also consumer engagement with which to, evolve and build on.
So let's talk about small business, and we can take this conversation in 100 different directions. But first of all, the demand for virtual experience applications within small business, where is it today? Where do you anticipate it going? What are some of the barriers to entry that small businesses will have, bearing in mind that their appetite for the application of virtual experience, virtual reality, is actually already pretty large. I saw a recent survey of small businesses that said that 47% envision that they will apply some level of virtual experience to their business in the next year. And that's not just the internal facing audience, it's really to their customers. They will apply something. So there's clearly demand there. Give us your sense of the SMB opportunity.
Yes, I think we very much sort of help the platforms help the SMBs. And what we've seen from that lens is very interesting, because we've seen that not only do you must get closer to the SMB's needs when it comes to the virtual experience after the possible. We've also seen that we've got to be very mindful of their digital maturity and what they can actually do, how it can lower their cost to serve, but also how we can make sure that we're making these opportunities as accessible as possible. We're also creating maybe more optionality, you know, so that basically SMBs don't have to have the whole menu. They can actually access a virtual experience use case, but at a fraction of the cost. So we have to bring down the cost to serve. We also have to, and this is critical, we have to enable SMBs to really leverage their first-party data, creating communities that they can run and own and nurture in a way that truly is very proprietary to that business. And, you know, first-party data is sort of the new oil. I mean, and SMBs, if we can help them truly understand, also create very intelligent segmentations from that first-party data, we can also make sure that we create the right virtual experience and we actually create the right content for that virtual experience, depending on what the objective is. As I said, is it a community meeting? Is it a product showcase? Is it, you know, to discuss, or is it maybe to teach, to upskill? Because, you know, that's also very interesting. You know, everybody wants to upskill in this world. So, you know, the SMBs being able to lead much more of a community orientation around that opportunity, I think is wonderful. And so what we have to do is we have to arm, you know, Accenture doesn't work necessarily with SMBs directly. We help companies help SMBs. And so even on the telco side, we're doing that, the same sort of motion, whether it's with Verizon, et cetera, and other companies, helping them create a kind of a product and service spectrum that has the right optionality to really help that specific SMB where they need that help. I think that's critical.
As SMBs really start to define what it exactly is they want to do with virtual reality, is it an imperative in your estimation that those of us who deliver products and services to them have to actually start incorporating virtual experiences and virtual reality into the products and services that we are delivering to them? Is that they're going to use their experience basically with their customers as a set of demands for us, those who sell to them. Do you see that happening?
I do, and it's part of an overall shift that we're seeing, because, you know, even when you look at SMBs, look at small business owners, and you look at, well, even this is we're seeing this on the enterprise side too, but with small, medium businesses, we've got to understand that we really are talking about a millennial heartland. We're talking about millennials who really have a much more consumer-driven perception and motion of trading. And what we're seeing is, you know, they're leaning into these technologies, they're leaning into virtual experiences naturally. So it's not like we have a resistance. We do have a situation where a lot of SMBs, obviously being the absolute backbone of you know, bringing back society post-COVID, we are seeing that because we're talking about millennials, they really have a natural sort of capability. Some of them, some don't. But when we're talking about some SMB leaders who are much more digitally mature, we're seeing that, you know, they're leaning into virtual experiences without us having to sort of force emotion. With regards to laggards and those who maybe aren't so digital mature, we're actively helping platforms and other companies to help them rapidly upskill. So one cannot underestimate the power of the training and the upskilling that is happening at a very sort of aggressive pace, because, you know, the more digitally able they are, the more they actually spend with platforms and telcos and companies. And so it's critical. And then therefore, the more utilization they get from the platform. So it really is a kind of a circular benefit for all if we can rapidly educate and upskill SMBs to be very digitally comfortable for those who aren't.
That's a terrific and very rich answer. Not to draw too fine a point on it, but say an application like QuickBooks, which is used by small businesses in the millions every single day. Does it behoove QuickBooks to frankly figure out and develop more virtual experience within the process of putting together your accounting every single day, so that they frankly increase the engagement that they get in it? And it becomes frankly less of an absolutely horrible task and something that is a little bit more, the experience is a little richer and maybe even becomes gamified. And then by follow on is really gamification the next kind of component of virtual reality that really starts to come to play.
Completely. And Dave, I was going to mention that because I'm fascinated by the gamification that is going on across the board, and even Accenture are gamifying VR at quite a rate, so that you actually get that sort of acceptance and leaning in. And to your Intuit example, yes, and yes. I mean, what's really interesting is that more of these companies are actually using that sort of short form video and social marketing techniques in the sort of virtual experience world. And definitely in terms of moving towards more snackable content to actually make these things less threatening, less boring, less, easier to incorporate into your everyday life. And it's really interesting because even when you look at SMBs and how they leverage the WhatsApp platform, it very much is segueing into a conversational way of marketing and doing business. And yes, to your point about gamification, there definitely is that, everyone likes sort of healthy competition, and amongst the SMBs, it's wonderful to be certified or to actually see that you are number one, number two on said league table. And these are techniques that a lot of the platform players can use, as basically they develop a much more consumer-oriented way of marketing. And to your point as well about virtual experiences in that consumer journey, we know full well, even in the enterprise world, that over 70% of that decision making happens online. And a lot of the research about, which platforms, which capabilities, which tools, etc., do you want to use? The research all happens by the millennial themselves in the comfort of their own home. And that's all online, that's all digital. So it's almost like 70 to 80% of the sale has already occurred without any sort of human interaction. And I think that SMBs are also looking at that phenomena, but looking at how they can have that digital communication along that journey in a much more inspiring, immersive, engaging way. And back to the community aspect, because they're dealing, with their customers, SMBs also are sitting there going, there's value to be gained from actually nurturing that community, but by doing it, by using social marketing and other techniques, which are much more conversational.
When you, last question, when you sit down with an executive team or a C-suite leader, and you're talking about the role that this incredibly dynamic new capability is going to play in their business over the course of the next 10 years, what does that first conversation sound like? I'm sure it's different from player to player, but broadly speaking, is it a moment of epiphany? Like, geez, I didn't really know what I didn't know. Is it more of a, hey, Nikki, nice to meet you. We need to do this, 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 and this, and get your team started? Or where does it land in the spectrum between those two things?
Again, it really depends where the client is, and sometimes we have a wow moment. For example, even with regards to our metaverse workshops, we're definitely having wow moments with some big retailers, some big CPG clients, some clients who hadn't quite realized the scale of what's going on at the moment. You know, even when you look at Decentraland and you look at the fact that virtual real estate is changing hands for millions, you know, we allude to certain examples that really do shock them. And you look at, you know, Nikes of this world, Gucci's of this world, Ralph Lauren, you know, the list goes on. They've already experimented so much in the metaverse. And I think that, you know, so you get that aha shock moment. What's interesting as well, though, even on a more perfunctory level, when we first were talking about virtual experiences last year, and we were talking about the spectrum of virtual experiences, even when we were dimensionalizing how you could use virtual experiences, segue into live shopping, segue into your digital storefront so that you could get that cash till ringing, even when we were talking to some enterprises about investor relations and the fact that that is a massive area that can be completely transformed, because at the moment it's very dull and one-dimensional, there is definitely that aha moment, because, you know, clients do sit there going, I had no idea about the art of the possible. And they had no idea that in many cases, I mean, it lowers your cost to serve by about 7x, 10x. And so, you know, with many customers, many clients, we're at that sort of, we're having a conversation about how to make that pivot from a lot of the physical event motion into virtual experiences and metaverse et al., but how to not throw baby out with the bathwater, so that if there are still physical events that need to be done, particularly sometimes with high touch VIPs and closed, you know, Chatham House rules forums, then fine, that is a motion that the enterprise wants to protect. But basically here on the virtual experience and metaverse, when you look at how you can create an analytic spine and a completely new motion at the fraction of a cost to serve, and it can be the gift that keeps on giving, because once you've got that analytic spine, that starts to feed your content, that feeds the customer journey, then they twig and then they go, oh my God, right, we have a come to Jesus moment, and we have to kind of re-whiteboard our plans going forward. And we're doing a lot of that, you know, completely pivoting to a virtual first motion, and then, you know, sort of talking to the enterprise and the C-suite about what that means. And what's interesting as well is that particular pivot in motion does mean an op model change. And so what we're seeing with a lot of enterprise clients, we're seeing that marketing, sales, service is converging, that whole motion is converging at such a rate. And that, along with realizing the virtual experience phenomenon, is creating a rapid restructure of a lot of enterprise customers, which is a very interesting space, a very interesting conversation that we're having across industries at the moment.
Nikki Mendonca, what an amazing conversation. And I hope I can persuade you to come to Napa and conduct a discovery workshop on behalf of the leadership that's going to be represented there, because I think that you've certainly opened my eyes. I think you've opened the eyes of probably many members of our audience. And I think that that discovery that you're seeing in the workshops that you do, for instance, in retail, is something that would probably have a 10x factor of wow for a lot of the folks that are in the business of serving small business and have historically been, and rightfully so, focused on that product and the service delivery, and may have experimented over the last 2 years with having to conduct virtual conferences or summits or meetings of their distribution teams or dealers or whatever, having to do that virtually, but have just really scratched the surface on what's possible, the things that you've talked about. Thank you so much for doing this. It's greatly appreciated. I think, again, it reminds me of the early days of web, the early days of mobile. I think many of us know this is going to be huge. The question is by what factor of huge and how fast. And I think that's obviously remains to be seen, but it's a fascinating topic. fascinating
It's very,
opportunity.
very exciting, and I would love to join you in Napa and explore further, because I mean I genuinely get very excited about this. Goldman Sachs have said that the metaverse is an $8 trillion opportunity, so I think that we should all be leaning in just in case they're right.
No, I think they might be I think they might be a little short on the opportunity. I mean, honestly, if you look at the magnitude of what is considered to be the web now, and the opportunity that it could be broadly described as mobile, dwarfs that number, and I think this could be just as large. Thank you
Yeah,
again so much for doing this.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.